Somebody must stand over the life of the person of resentment and say to them, there is somebody who has held you back. The person is you.
Hardship is not a choice. Victimhood is a choice.
In this video, we're going to take a look at a recent conversation between Vivek Ramaswamy and Douglas Murray, two brilliant minds that got together to discuss the idea of victimhood, resentment, and how to combat this. And the reason why I love this so much is because Douglas Murray uses his elite linguistic skills to present a profound philosophical idea, and then Vivek Ramaswamy comes in with the logical, solutions-based approach. I think you guys are going to enjoy this, so let's get into it.
Let me lead us on to what's perhaps one of the most awkward parts of this conversation, which is we talk most of the time in discussions about meritocracy about the people who can and the people who can succeed. Of course, in any society, but particularly in a democracy like America, you have a flip side of that problem. You said, I was very struck by it, hardship is not the same thing as victimhood. I couldn't agree more, but we do live in a society in which victimhood is the main goal. To be a victim and to be on the victim hierarchy, to have the delicious opportunity to be the most victimized person is clearly the aspiration. We've all seen it in our lives when people pick up the microphone in a Q&A and they say, speaking as, and I think, everything that's going to come afterwards is going to be garbage. And then they'll say something about their lived experience, as if there's any other kind of experience. In my unlived experience. But we do have this problem, particularly in America, that the seeking of victimhood in our own lifetimes, and you wrote about this obviously in both of your books, but in our own lifetimes we've moved, in America in particular, which is so striking, from a culture of heroism to a culture of victimhood. And if I can lay out very quickly, there's one particular problem in this, in a democracy, which is something which I quote Nietzsche a little bit in my most recent book, in The War on the West, and whenever a student says to me that they're a fan of Nietzsche, I always say, oh yeah, which bits? You've got to think it's worth using carefully. But I used rather carefully Nietzsche's work on the genealogy of morals for my last book. And there's one particular insight of his that really struck me and is pertinent to our situation and to our discussion today, which is this. Nietzsche talks about the type of person who, he says, a person of resentment, who, among other things, and see if anyone can recognize this type in the society we're now in, among other things, tears, he says, at wounds long since healed and then cries about their hurt. Now, Nietzsche says there's one particular problem, which is that the person of resentment needs somebody to stand over their lives and make a correction. But it's not even clear to Nietzsche who that person should be. It's not clear to me who it should be. Nietzsche ends up talking about the person maybe being a secular priest, is the term he uses, quite an interesting term. But he says that somebody must stand over the life of the person of resentment and say to them at some point, you are right. You have reason to be resentful. There is somebody who has ruined your life. There is somebody who has held you back. The person is you. Now, that is probably the least pleasant thing to hear, and probably one of the hardest things to ever say. How can a politician, should a politician, say to certain people, you know, you have screwed up your life, and it's been your responsibility and your fault. You could turn it around, but if you don't want to, you'll still be the only person to blame.
So beautifully put there by Douglas as per usual. And before we get to Vivek's response, I just want to put a few exclamation marks on the point that he just made. He talks there about Nietzsche and the idea of resentment and the type of person that tears at wounds long since healed and cries about their hurt. Have a think about how that pertains to our society today. What are the wounds that long since healed that are being torn at? Leave it in the comments. And there's an extremely profound and difficult question that is being asked here that if you actually build out is a massive problem in our culture today. We live in a time where victimhood is not only accepted, but it's a currency. It's put up on a pedestal. The more of a victim you are, the more oppressed you are, and the more oppressed groups you are a part of, the more unique you are, the more of a hero you are. I find this idea incredibly dangerous, especially as someone who, when I was younger, found myself unknowingly in states of resentment. Resentful about not achieving anything in life, resentful that I was really overweight, resentful that I was extremely unhappy, and resentful that my friends around me and the people I was seeing were all achieving things. It's a very dark place to be in, to look at the success of others and feel jealous and resentful rather than being inspired by it. And it's not an easy place to escape from. And when I look around and see vast swathes of the population that are suffering from this and also having it pushed upon them, it seems like it's a recipe for disaster. And this poses the question, like Douglas has said, for a president, how do you convey the message to a population that the only thing holding you back is you? Isn't it just so much easier and so much more politically expedient to peddle victimhood and to say, yes, you are a victim. Here's more free stuff because you deserve it. It is so much more difficult, but so much more righteous to promote personal accountability. Let's see how Vivek responds to this.
I think here's how I would say it. It is still in your power to turn it around, but that is your choice to make. I think hardship is not a choice. Victimhood is a choice.
Yes.
And the best a politician can do, certainly a president can do, is at least to create the conditions in a country where we don't create the incentives for people to choose victimhood. And so would I, if I'm speaking as a national leader here, would I point to the person and say it is your fault? I would say it the other way. I think it is our fault for creating a culture, including the economic incentives that backstop it, for you to make the choice that you are making today, to be a victim rather than to be a victor. Okay? Now, we will do our part and fix that on the expectation that you will then do yours. And I think that is the kernel, thank you, for a national revival in this country. I think it makes the difference. That single trade will make the difference of whether we are Rome or, more likely, look at how long we've been alive as a country, more likely whether we are Carthage or whether we're just a little young, going through our version of adolescence. Adolescence is a period where, even absent those government incentives, there's something about adolescence that makes you want to see yourself as a victim of your parents, of your conditions, of your high school peers. Right? There's something about this is woven into nature too. It's not just a governmental citizenry relationship. It's something within each of us. Well, we're going through that version of adolescence as a nation right now. And I think in the good version of this, where we have leaders that are willing to change that incentive structure and to boldly look their citizenry in the eye and speak that hard truth back to them, set the expectation of what we expect of citizens. The idea of being a citizen entailing a duty. Part of that duty is to look within, not to blame the other, but ask about what I can do myself. Well, if we're able to do that, then I think as a nation itself, we will too get through our version of adolescence and be stronger on the other side of it. As there were many rises and many falls of Rome, actually, that's one of the secrets of history. There was no one rise and fall of Rome. There were many rises and many falls. I think we may still be ahead of the next rise in the American experiment. I truly believe that. I think it depends on the leaders who we have who are willing to speak that hard truth.
I'm so glad that you said that about adolescence in America. It comes much better from your mouth than from mine. I was brought up to believe, as Jessica Mitford once said, we weren't taught much about American history in Britain. What we were taught was that basically the Americans had done something unspeakable in the 18th century, and we preferred not to talk about it.
A fantastic response, as usual, by Vivek. And I'm fascinated by this point he makes where he talks about the relative youth of the United States compared with other great empires throughout history. I think that one could argue that the progress of the American empire has been much more significant and rapid, but in regards to the longevity of the empire, it's infantile, it's nothing. The Egyptian empire lasted 3,000 years, at least, from what we know. China was ruled by various empires for more than 2,000 years. Greek civilization lasted for about 1,300 years. The Roman Empire lasted about 1,000 years. And the Carthaginians, which Vivek mentioned there, lasted about 450 years. Carthage, for those of you who aren't too familiar with that empire, is where modern-day Tunisia is. And America is nearly 250 years old. And you can imagine that every single one of these empires thought that they were the greatest, most powerful, most advanced civilization ever to exist, and the buck stops with them. They would not have been thinking about civilizational collapse, and they would not be thinking that one day they would just be a distant memory, but they are, and that's the way that history works. And this is because empires are extremely difficult to maintain. And when you look around at the falling birth rates, at the senile president, at the moral bankruptcy of culture, at the obfuscation of gender roles and other basic truths, it becomes very easy to see why Vivek draws this parallel. In order to build a great civilization or a great empire, there needs to be a base understanding of truth and of social cohesion. And people need to feel inspired to build, to contribute, and develop the empire. Victim mentality helps absolutely nobody. And if this narrative continues, then there'll be fewer and fewer people with winners' mentalities. People that are productive, industrious, competent. And these people will end up carrying a bigger and bigger load. A load left behind by the people crying in their safe spaces. Because life is hard and they're a victim and they deserve more government-free stuff. So food for thought there, guys. Looking forward to reading your comments as per usual. Hit those links in the bio. Find me on all platforms, Locals, Rumble, other YouTube channels, etc. And if you guys want to watch another video, click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.